Energy 808, the cutting edge. This is ThinkTech. I'm Jay Fidell. And the handsome young man is Jerry Ornellas. He's a farmer in Kauai, and he follows and advocates for farming in Hawaii. Welcome to the show, Jerry.
Thank you, Jay.
Well, we have a few problems that we need to talk about. We need to get to a place where Hawaii can be not only self-sufficient but even make a buck with diversified agriculture. And you've been following that for a long time. You're involved in that. So let's try to break it down a little bit. One of them is water. Is there a water issue in Kauai? I mean, I thought Kauai had more water than you could take a stick at. One of the wettest places on earth, but yet there's a water problem for farmers. Is this true?
Well, if I can paraphrase Mark Twain, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting, right? So, water has always been contentious, and it still is. We've got lots of water. What we lack is infrastructure. So, we've got some really serious problems regarding water. I mean, if you watch the evening news, not a newscast goes by without some major break in our water lines, right? And that's for municipal use. Agriculture is even worse. I mean, our systems are antiquated. They're plantation era. They weren't designed for the uses today.
I remember they had these ditches up at the top of the mountains, and the ditches would deliver the water to the plantations below. But when the plantations stopped doing business, the ditches fell into disrepair. And so all of that benefit that the plantations had created by building the ditches was essentially lost. And you're right, infrastructure does not last forever. We may have had it in earlier times, but we don't have it now. What do we need to do to rebuild the infrastructure that would deliver water to the diversified farmer?
I think part of it is going to have to be redesigning some of these infrastructure. For instance, the plantations would do what's called pulse irrigation, which is a lot of water coming down all at once. So you had needed a lot of storage. You needed large reservoirs, and oftentimes they would drain them down while irrigating a field. In the early days, that was mostly flood irrigation, which requires tremendous amounts of water. Today, we do a different kind of agriculture. It's not Our crops are not as thirsty, and there's much more emphasis now on conserving water. So these systems, as you pointed out, unlined open ditch systems, uh, you know, we still use them, but frankly, they're a thing of the past. What we need is to modernize these systems, preferably by putting the water in pipes so that we don't have open ditches, which leads to loss when you have an open ditch, evaporative loss, as well as leakage. These systems are very old, and we need some serious investment.
So, okay, that's water is critical. I mean, how can you grow crops without water? You cannot. We know that in the West, where the Colorado River is essentially drying up, and that whole watershed and agricultural area is suffering for it. We don't want that to happen in Hawaii. We want to be ahead of the game. So let's talk for a moment about legislative support now. It's eh, supporting any industry, building any industry in this state has traditionally required legislative support and funding. And in order to build diversified agriculture, after the demise of the plantations, we need to make a special effort to do that. It doesn't come naturally. It doesn't come from heaven. Somebody has to support it and advocate for it, and give us the nod that it's a good idea. Are we getting that kind of support from the government?
Um, Back up a little bit. Okay, so Hawaii is a little unique in that the plantations built all of these systems with the permission of the territorial government at the time, who said you may build these systems, oftentimes traversing um, government lands, and when you're done with it, it reverts back to us. The state has always owned the systems that were not on private lands from these plantations. An interesting thing is, in other states, this is not necessarily the case as far as private ownership and building of these systems goes. In the Western United States and throughout the United States, you have the Bureau of Reclamation, which is responsible for building and oftentimes maintaining these very extensive irrigations. In Hawaii, we didn't have that. So what we had was the Big Five. they did all of the heavy lifting in the early days, right? So um, when you say they built and maintained, yes, but towards the end of their era, they deferred maintenance on this system. They knew very well they were going to go out of business, right? So what are you going to do? You're not going to put money in there, right? And unfortunately, um, some of the agencies that were tasked with monitoring and had oversight over these ditch systems, frankly, were asleep at the wheel. So they allowed the deterioration to continue until finally, at the point where the plantations finally went out of business, handed over the system, they were in really bad shape.
Mm. Yeah, that's too bad. It was a transition, leaving nothing behind, essentially. But you do have what is it, A and B out there with macadamia nuts in Kauai. How do they operate? Are they still growing a lot of nuts? Are they an important feature in the Kauai agricultural landscape?
Yeah, well, A&B is all long gone, except for some commercial property here in Kauai. They recently sold their agricultural interests, and believe you're referring to Kauai Coffee,
Hmm.
which is
Yes.
which is the largest coffee farm in the United States, and about 3,000 acres of coffee, fully mechanized, great operation, but no longer owned by A&B. However, they still need water, right? So they are operating the irrigation systems that formerly fed sugarcane lands.
Yeah, my recollection is that Kauai, just taking Kauai for a moment,
Mhm.
was dominated by McBride Sugar. And when McBride Sugar went out of business, they just held on to the land. They didn't really do anything for a successor, for a succession of any kind. So, am I right? It's just still sitting there.
Well, we've got a lot of land that's fallow, and this is true throughout the state. We've got 1.9 million acres of agriculturally zoned land in the state of Hawaii, and by mainland standards, that's not much, but by Hawaii standards, that's a lot of land. A lot of it was irrigated. A lot of it is no longer irrigated because of closures of reservoirs and ditch systems, and um, multiple owners. Grow Farm, AMB, Dewey Plantation Company. A lot of these were combined when they were sold. Case has a lot of land here in Kauai, almost 40,000 acres. And of course, Gay and Robinson are still operating agricultural lands, not raising sugar anymore, but trying to diversify their operations. So the real challenge is, how do we get these lands back into production?
You bet. Well, what can the government do? I mean, if I made you governor for a day, Jerry, let's say today, what would you do to get these lands back in production? What steps would you take?
Well, let me preface that by saying, um, simply changing economic and political policy are not going to get us to where we need to go, which is increasing production. We need a comprehensive plan, primarily directed at agricultural, excuse me, at agricultural technology, and that technology has to reach the farmer level. It has to get to the farmer. That's where we need to invest in, and without that, it's like fighting a war with bows and arrows versus tanks. Because on the mainland, they're fully invested in mechanization. They do things on a big scale. We don't necessarily have to do it on a big scale because we don't have that kind of land. But I think with the proper application of agricultural technology, we can level the playing field a little bit.
Okay, here's a big question. Remember that technology is our middle name here on ThinkTech. So when you say technology, what technology are you talking about? You must be
I am
thinking
thought,
of something.
well, let's take mechanization, for instance, right? Right now, many of our crops do not lend themselves to mechanization. Take taro, for instance, right? As far as the planting and the harvesting of taro goes, 500 years ago, they were doing it exactly the same way, right? So, um, of course, tillage and stuff has improved. Uh, we need technology in plant breeding. We need technology in mechanization. We need technology in energy use, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But without that, um, we'll never get price parity with the mainland. We'll never be able to match what they do. We had a thriving rice industry here in Hawaii, and one of the things that led to its downfall was that the people in Sacramento started to mechanize, and in Hawaii they did not. At the turn of the century, we were exporting rice, and now we don't even have an industry.
That's what happens. So, is it? How about the technology on the web? I mean, can I go, for example, on the web and go to a website and order X number of bushels of taro? Is that possible? Do we have technology that allows for ordering, buying, distributing?
You know, we're pretty much on our own when it comes to that, and that's a great point, Jay. And it has to do with marketing, and um, I see real potential there, where you can connect the farmer directly to the consumer, eliminate the middleman. And I recently started doing that with my lychee sales. And actually, I didn't do it. My daughter prompted me to do it because I was doing it the old-fashioned way. And not only did I get a price increase, but it increased, sales increased, the demand increased. So yeah, we got to come out of the dark ages here, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about crop management? What about issues relating to this? The seeding and the harvesting, and the safety against what is that beetle that's going on now in Kauai? Um,
Coconut rhinoceros, the
yeah, the
coconut
rhinoceros
rhinoceros.
beetle. You have that like other islands do too. But
Mhm.
the what do you want to call it? The chemical issues and the safety issues of the crops. How do you keep them safe? How do you avoid them being eaten? How do you make them as healthy as possible? Aren't those also technology issues?
Absolutely. And invasive species are a huge, huge problem here in Hawaii. Everything from, I mean, let me put it this way: how would you feel if a bird came along and ate your paycheck? And that's pretty much what's happening to our farmers, right? This year, um, I didn't have much of a lychee crop at all because the rose-ringed parakeets, which are an invasive bird, um, consumed most of the crop. um, Feral pigs, deer on other islands. There's no end to it, and as soon as you turn around, there's a new one. So yes, employing technology in that area is absolutely vital.
Can the government help you? Can the agricultural, what do they call it now? The agricultural corporation help you?
Well, you may be referring to ADC, which is more of a land management.
Okay, let me call it then the Department of Agriculture, the Board of
Yeah,
Agriculture.
Department of Ag. They do what they can. They're chronically underfunded. I mean, the Department of Agriculture, College of Tropical and College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources also underfunded, right? Whenever there's a problem, these are the first guys to get cut all the time. So we need to refund those two entities, and that'll help us greatly.
Yeah, it's an investment into the future, isn't it? And you can't have a return without having an investment. The other thing that I would ask you about is the human resources part of that. If you want young people, I mean, good that you have a daughter who's with you and helps you, but not everybody does. And some farmers are getting old and they can't manage the farms anymore, so they give it up. And there's nothing happens. It ends. And query, what about getting young people involved? What about making jobs, careers, and companies for them, to carry on the industry?
If farming were lucrative, you wouldn't have a problem recruiting anybody, right? It's a wonderful lifestyle. You're outside, people who do this love what they do. Our fundamental problem is that agriculture is not lucrative enough at this time. I'm optimistic. That's not to say that can't change, But I'm not going to cheerlead anybody off the edge of a cliff by saying, "Come on down, the water's fine." It's a tough business, and it is a business. I mean, and I support all kinds of agriculture, even those that are self-sufficient, not focused towards business, that use traditional means. I'm fine with all of them. But if you're talking about agriculture as a commercial enterprise, except for a few exceptions, I don't believe it's a very lucrative field to go into at this time. So we really need to sharpen our pencils and get to work here.
Well, if I tell you that in the future there will be shortages because of supply line issues, because of weather issues, climate change on the mainland, oh, it's happening now and elsewhere. And that Hawaii, to the extent that Hawaii is self-sufficient and there's no other sources or other sources have been curtailed, then the farmer's lot will be better, no? Because he will get better returns for his efforts if there are shortages in food. And it is likely there will be shortages in food, don't you think?
I I I'll have to agree with you there. I hope it doesn't take that kind of a situation um, for us to right the boat and get into sailing in the proper direction here because um, what you say is true. I mean, the world population, supply chain issues, and one thing, you mentioned a bunch of problems that we have, and you didn't mention the labor problem, right? I mean, restaurants can't find people, right? Somebody who hands out towels at the pool, they can't find those people. Now I got to compete against them and have them come into my farm, work in harsh conditions, sun, rain, whatever, right? How are we going to compete? So the only way we can do it is to become, an attractive um, industry by paying proper wages.
Yeah, you got to do that. So, if the government gave you a kind of, grant benefit, which are not easy to get, but certainly not easy to get in agriculture, that would help. It seems to me if the government cares about developing a given sector, a given industry, the government has to step up and it has to provide whatever incentives and support it can possibly provide. Otherwise, the curve is flat and nothing will happen. I worry about that in connection with agriculture because agriculture, whether we like it or not, is critical to the state and to the people. And relying on 90% of our food from outside is really not a solution because that's not necessarily sustainable. So, what can the legislature and you, as the governor, what can you do to make this happen?
Well, like I said, from my point of view, I would say invest in research, research and development, technology. Every dollar I've read somewhere, every dollar invested in research returns $20 in benefits. I'm often asked the question, Jay, regarding food security and self sufficiency. Can Hawaii feed itself? Oh, absolutely. One hand tied behind our back. We've got the water, we've got the land. We lack the political will. Also, feeding ourselves is one thing. Feeding ourselves a varied diet is another thing, right? So we can feed ourselves. You're not going to have the same diet that you have now, right? So um, you got to be careful what questions you ask. Very important to ask the proper question. So
Yeah,
yes, we can.
that's like design thinking out of Stanford. The scientist comes and he says, "What do you want me to do?" And the guy tells him what he wants him to do. And then the scientist says, "No, no, that's not what you want me to do. Let me help you fashion the question."
Yes.
It's the same idea. So let's talk about energy for a minute, Jerry. Energy is, this show essentially, Energy 808, the cutting edge. And as Richard Ha in Hamakua always says, if the farmer can't make money, he won't farm, or she. And furthermore, that the farmer needs energy to farm. And when you talk about technology and new systems and automation, that does require energy. I'm sure everybody would agree with that. So, what's the situation for energy on the farm?
Couple of encouraging trends, I think, and that is the decentralization of our energy systems. Right? I mean, the old model was one giant plant that or power plant that produced energy, which you distributed throughout the entire island. Well, now here in Kauai, as we lead the state in renewable energy.
Yeah.
I mean, we're approaching 70%.
Yeah. You should be proud of KIUC for sure.
Yeah, they're doing a great job, no question about it. And energy, as you pointed out, directly related to agriculture. Everything we do requires energy. Um, but I am encouraged in that. Take solar, for instance, right? Farmers generally operate in areas where you have enough room to put in solar panels, right? So if we could provide our own energy, think of what a boost that would be for the individual farmers if we didn't have to purchase energy. Now that applies to electricity, which is an important source of energy, no question. But what about fossil fuels, right? What about diesel and gasoline, right? Um, they are developing electric tractors. I, you know, I think I'll see the day when I use one if I live long enough. But yeah, so no question about it. Energy is absolutely critical. I mean, we needed to process our foods that we grow. We needed to store that food. Refrigeration is expensive. It's energy consuming, and that we really got to start moving on that one for sure.
What you say makes me think of the controversy over the super ferry a few years ago, where the farmers had this tremendous option to load up their produce in the back the truck, get the truck on the ferry, go to another island, sell it there. That was really terrific for farmers because it would be so much cheaper and faster to do it that way than put it on a barge. Your thoughts about that?
I still get the scars from that from that encounter. I actually monitored the meeting that Linda Lingle had here in Kauai when she came down. She asked me to facilitate it, and it was quite an experience. There were some people that were not happy at all. Um, and energy absolutely ties right into transportation, right? It's a double-edged sword. Okay, so take shipping transportation, right? The reason we're in such trouble today in Hawaii is because of what? Containerized cargo from the West Coast. Right? Prior to that, I started farming in the early 60s, and we were doing well up until around 1970 when containerized cargo really took hold, uh, especially refrigerated containerized cargo. It stomped us into the ground, you know. So you open up these doors, it flows both ways, right? So we can get our products to Honolulu. Honolulu people can get their products to Kauai, right? But generally speaking, yes, improvements in transportation are going to go a long way to get us to where we need to go.
Yeah. Before we began the show, you were telling me about your thoughts over whether we should uh, create a path toward self-sufficiency, a path toward export, or a path toward both. What should our focus be, Jerry? I mean, how should we look at this in terms of developing the industry? If you were addressing, some investors, maybe some legislators, what would you tell them the path should be?
You know, I'm a big believer in private enterprise. Yeah. So, 5-year plans like they had in the old Soviet Union and China is not going to work. Right? You got to let the free enterprise system do what it's going to do. But as you point out, we need some help, right? The government cannot dictate to us what to plant, when to plant, and when to harvest. Um, we'd be starving in short order if we did that. So,
Right.
but that's not to say the government doesn't have a role. Government has a huge role to play, and here again, that goes back to research, um, plant breeding research, application of technology. Government can foster this, grants in aid to get the ball rolling, and especially taking care of their own kuleana, which a lot of these irrigation systems, incidentally, are owned by the state of Hawaii and are in disrepair, need to be fixed.
Well, that actually leads to a huge, big question, which a lot of people have identified and tried to tackle, but they haven't succeeded. And the problem, I'm sure you've thought about it, been involved in it. So you have a young farmer who wants to start a business, a farming business, but he can't get the land. The land is too expensive, and there are big landowners that are not going to sell him land. They may lease him land, maybe, but the lease isn't for that long. And then when he takes that lease to the bank and tries to get a loan to buy his equipment and start a business, and starting a farming business ain't cheap. You have to buy a lot of things. Um, and so the bank won't give it to him because the lease isn't long enough to be good collateral for them. And the result is he's stuck. He's stuck on day one. So my question to you, and lots of plans and schemes have been advanced to try to get the land in the hands of the young farmer or the old farmer, to try to make that into a productive investment, a career, a business that will at least be subsistence and maybe even make some money, which we need to have them make money. What's being done? What can be done in order to get the land into the hands? Enough with fallow land, enough with hundreds, thousands of acres of fallow land that could be used for diversified agriculture. We have not really achieved a way to distribute that land.
It circles back to the problem of profitability. Okay. These large landowners would love nothing better than to lease their lands out to aspiring farmers or established farmers for that matter. These farmers can't afford it because they're not making enough money. Right. The true cost, and it's land is one thing, and part of this program has to do with water, right? These antiquated irrigation systems, tremendous amounts of resources going into maintaining them, right? So these farmers cannot pay the true cost of water, for instance, right? So in many cases, I know in the case of Grow Farm, for instance, they're actually subsidizing farmers, because they cannot charge the true value of the land and of what the water would cost. But here, the fundamental problem is one of profitability. Like Richard says, farmer can make money, he's going to farm, right? So if we can solve that problem, many of our other problems will go away, including worker housing, and attracting labor, improving our farming methods. All of those problems would be solved. So that the real issue, I think, is one of how do we solve this problem of um, uh, profitability in agriculture? That's fundamental, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm dreaming of a time when local produce is really good quality. It's distributed very quickly. It's distributed at a price which at least is competitive with mainland produce. And restaurants and food stores, buy it and sell it. If you break that down into the separate issues there, the government can have an effect on all of that. It's about tax policy, really. If you give the farmer a break, then the farmer is going to have not only the financial incentive to farm, but he's going to have the psychological incentive that says somebody cares about me, somebody wants me to succeed, somebody says this is a good idea for the future of the state. Um, and that's why I would like to have a number of shows with you, Jerry, going forward. I like to circle back with you and break that chain of events and issues and challenges down so we can address each one maybe separately in terms of state policy, tax policy, grant policy, agricultural policy in general. There's so much to talk about and so much to do. So, what message would you leave with our viewers today about how much attention they should pay to farming and agriculture in Hawaii? Why is it important to the guy on the street?
Well, you'll often hear people say, well, I'm not involved in agriculture, right? I'm far removed from agriculture. Well, let me put it this way. If you eat food, you are involved in agriculture. And we've never had um, a famine in this country. A lot of the immigrants who have come to Hawaii have experienced it. But the United States of America we've never, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. And something you alluded to earlier is that it absolutely can happen. I mean, look at it doesn't even have to be famine per se. It could be um, supply chain issues, right? We depend so much on just-in-time deliveries. So absolutely, and I may have come off during this interview sounding a little pessimistic, but the fact is, I am an eternal optimist, and I believe that we're gonna get this done. We're going to get it done, Jay, and government absolutely has a role to play. Private sector, huge role to play. The university, everybody's got to pitch in, but we got to define the problem. We got to come up with that right question and then solve it.
Absolutely, Jerry. Keep keep on it. Keep advocating for it, and I will like to circle back with you. And I know there are a lot of people out there. They may not say it in in the same words, but there's a lot of people out there who totally agree with you, including there's one person somewhere behind you or around you who seems to be a chicken, and he agrees with you or she.
That's farm life.
That's the authentic farmer, Jerry Ornellas. Thank you so much, Jerry.
Thank you, Jay.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Thanks so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please click on the like and subscribe buttons on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And please check out our website. That's thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.